All right, guys. We are on air live. Welcome into today's show. This will be broadcasting on podcasts on the 8th, but today is actually the 3rd of May, 2015. And my name's Aaron Montgomery. I'm with Coastal Business Supplies, and as always, I'm joined by my very good friend Terry Combs, who's with Equipment Zone, and you can also find him over at terrycombs.com. Terry, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great today, Aaron. It's another beautiful day in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, and having a nice weekend, doing a lot of writing, and had good intentions of going to the pool today, but now I waited around and I have to finish my screen printing article, so it may not happen. But otherwise, a good Sunday. How about you, Aaron? I know you're doing a little work outside.
Yeah, I was just rubbing some of the sand off of my arm from fixing up the kid's swing set that was leaning a little too far, and now that he's getting to be a bigger kid, I'm afraid he's going to tear it down. So we're trying to brace it up a little bit, but it's a kid running in here. Well, let's go ahead and bring Dave on, and we'll chat about a few things and dive right into our shop calibration. So, Dave, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing good. I've got a little audio difficulty here, I think.
Yeah, if you're getting you're probably getting the feed. So when it's going on over at YouTube, if you close out not the Hangout page, but close out one of those tabs up there where the YouTube's kind of playing at, that might help because it does delay, so it sounds pretty funny. I had the same thing happening, but well, you look at that. So Dave, this is Dave Gehrich. He's the VP of say, get it right for me here, Dave. VP of sales over there at Atlas Screen Supply. Is that correct?
Right. VP of sales for Atlas. Been there about a year and a half.
Great.
After 20 years with ICC Chemical. So.
Great. All right. Well, recently we talked about some stuff at a live broadcast there at DAX in the Chicagoland area, and you've got something you guys call shop calibration that we're going to talk about a little bit today. But this is our first time getting you on a regular broadcast, I believe. No, that's not true. We talked chemicals a while back, now that I think about it. So I'm all over the place here today.
It was sometime during the year last year that we talked shop chemicals, things like that with Dave. So, but we've had a lot of brief conversations with Dave at our live broadcast. He's always always that guy that will come and help us out with. Well, our problem with these live broadcasts, Aaron, as you well know, is a lot of people say they're going to come, and then there's windows of time when there's no one there. Dave's always a trooper, comes early and helps us fill the time. And of course, at the last broadcast in Chicago, Dave and I spent quite a bit of time talking, but then we had like a line of people we had to squeeze in at the end, and even ran over our time. So it's those live broadcasts are a little tricky.
Try to help where I can.
Very good, very good. Well, let's dive into what we wanted to talk about today, Terry. This is like I said, when you guys were talking back in Chicago, you just really briefly touched on what's going on here, and I thought to myself, wow, this is information that people need out there. So I cornered Dave at the end of the show and drug him on here on a Sunday afternoon. So let's talk about shop calibration.
I guess I'm the only one here that can say Sunday morning, because I'm in that last time zone in continental U.S. where it's still morning time. But Dave, the whole concept of shop calibration, the first time you brought it up in one of our broadcasts, I had never heard you mention it before, and so I heard about it live, and I have to tell you, I was really impressed. The concept of it is incredible, and I kept thinking what it would have been like to have somebody come into my shop when I was an active screen printer, especially when I was new to the business, and help me calibrate what I'm doing. So Dave, give us an idea of what shop calibration actually means.
What we found is through taking a lot of technical calls where a customer will be having a challenge with an emulsion or an ink or what have you, that typically there was one of three main areas that was not exactly calibrated in for their shop, and that was the curing temperature, what their oven, what their dryer was running, the tension of their screens, how were they using old screens or new screens, and then also the combination of that if they're doing a multicolor print. But then also the exposure of the emulsion, and that's probably where we spent most of our time initially was in most shops. It doesn't matter if they're a large shop or medium or small shop, but many times they're not doing the exposure testing that's probably needed, especially when they change emulsion so often. They're not familiar with that. So what we found was that if we could get all three of those things studied and calibrated in that shop, their ability to produce a good garment went up exponentially. And so we started to put together that program that we could take out to our customers really on a regular basis, quarterly basis, something like that at a minimum, to offer that as a service to the customers.
Well, hey Dave, let me kind of jump to back to one of the things you just said. When you say people are changing their emulsions often, why is that? Is it because they're changing for price, or they're trying to put a Band-Aid on a problem?
I think it's a shiny object. We in the industry, if it's new and improved. My wife will laugh at me every time I go to a Walmart. If it says new and improved, it could be something I will never use, but if it's new and improved, I'm going to own it because it's new and improved, and I have to have that. So many textile printers as photopolymers. You remember when photopolymers really got popular way back when, and the one I remember the most was QTX from Milano, and it came out, and it was fast, and it was all these beautiful things. And we would get a dozen calls a day at ICC about, hey, do you have something that would unlock about 100 screens with a photopolymer emulsion? Because they didn't know how to work with it, they didn't know how to reclaim it. And nowadays, that so many of our shops have went to the photopolymers only to find out that their shop will not allow them to have an emulsion that's that sensitive to light or the rest of their process. So they try to go to the faster, better, bigger, smarter product, when in turn, another product would really work okay for them. So I guess to answer your question partially is it's because it's new and improved and somebody kind of sold them on the notion. And then also sometimes they think if they're not using that product, they're doing something wrong.
I think that's interesting, and I've talked to people who've just struggled with pure photopolymer, and I'll get to the point where I say, well, now what is the advantage that you're trying to achieve by exposing the screen in 6 seconds? And then
Right.
they can't quite tell you the answer, because I'm like, okay, you're going to expose it in 6 seconds. I'm pretty sure you're not going to wash it out in 6 seconds while the next one's exposing. So let's talk about what the advantage is. There is an innovation that somebody came up with in direct-to-garment printing, and I don't want to say what the innovation is because everybody will know who I'm talking about. But somebody came over who's not from that industry and said to me, Terry, you've got to see this. This new product that does this, this, and this. And my first response was, well, when would you ever use that? And the customer was like, oh, yeah, I guess I wouldn't ever use it, but it was cool. So,
Right.
what do you
Right.
do?
Oh, we get that as well. That the one legitimate concern I'll have a smaller shop say is that the shelf life of the emulsion. So if they're using a photopolymer, that emulsion will last them longer. But the rule of, I always try to give rules of thumb that they can apply, that make sense to them. So you have as much time to handle your screen in an unlight safe way as your screen needs exposure. So if you have an emulsion that exposes in 6 seconds, in your shop you have to be able to get that screen to the exposure unit in less than 6 seconds in a light safe way. And most of the time they can understand that they don't realize. I was at a shop recently where the guy was coating his screens, photopolymer emulsion, right there in the middle of the shop, and he wasn't aware that the clock started ticking on the sensitivity of it the moment you opened it. He thought that didn't happen until the screen dried. And so I helped him wash out about 20 screens that were of no value. and we learned the the light safety thing. But you're right that they a lot of times the benefit you get um, is not worth the heartache that you're going to go through to maintain that benefit.
Well, I think that a lot of times people don't anticipate that by changing one of the variables, it impacts the other variables. And just like this person, I'm sure he was using a dual cure, and heck yeah, I mean, unless you're standing out on your patio, you can pretty much coat those screens anywhere at any time and without any
Sure.
problem. And you change that variable, and all of a sudden, well, of course, it's not what they've done. There's something wrong with this emulsion. There's something wrong with with my screens. There's something wrong with chemicals. You know how that goes.
Yeah, no, it's true, and you're right. You've heard me say 100 times that somebody a lot smarter than me said it once. Screen printing is the orchestration of variables, and you're not going to get a good song if the band's not in tune. But I was thinking about doing this show today, and so this morning I got home from church. I was hungry and was going to eat. I am a big fan of bacon, and so I'm going to fix some bacon and eggs. And the variables I was working with was here in southern Indiana, it's not uncommon to use a cast iron skillet, and so I have my cast iron skillet. And as far as I'm concerned, on the stove, there are really only 3 settings. I can wait, I'm kind of hungry, or I'm starving. And so I turn it on I'm starving mode on the cast iron skillet. And at that mode, bacon fries up pretty quick and gets pretty crispy pretty quick. But I was really hungry, and I think that really kind of fits, that analogy fits what we do in screen printing sometimes is I really need to get this job out the door. So it would be best if I'd let that coated screen sit for a while. Or it would be best if I reclaimed some good screens and coated them, because this screen really isn't that great with tension. But the customer's going to be here in an hour, and I really need to force this all the way through. So I'm going to coat the screen. I'm going to run it through my dryer a couple times, see if that won't dry it out, and expose it real quick. And I'm going to set my dryer on nuclear temperature and see if I can't crank these shirts through there, because I am super hungry and I need to eat that bacon right now. And so you get those variables out of whack, and you cross your fingers. That the carpal tunnel is not the ailment that we should worry about as screen printers. It's carpal finger syndrome, where they're crossing their fingers so often that ink stays on that shirt. That really is probably going to be a major medical problem coming up in screen printing.
Yeah, it's like it's that kind of crisis management mode that unfortunately so many shops in our industry they're reactionary. It's okay. What's today's crisis, and what how can I patch everything together to make this work? And so obviously from what you guys are doing with this calibration system is you're assisting those people to kind of get out of crisis mode and get into proper methods mode. So Dave, tell us a little bit about who is this geared toward for you guys?
Well, obviously we can't, as much as we'd like to, we can't physically get in-house to every person, every shop that we want to. So we try to lay it out a little bit that we can do a calibration visit even over the phone if they have certain tools and whatnot. But we gear toward anybody that's printing, anybody that is decorating garments and using screens and curable inks is a candidate for this visit. And we bring in the tools, that you're going to use an exposure calculator, you're going to use a tension meter, a heat gun. We're actually going to incorporate the donut, the dryer donut, to calibrate the dryers. But we also need to make it something that they're able to do on their own. So if they, not very many shops have a dryer donut to test the curing. So we need to kind of make sure that they have those tools. So the exposure calculator, make sure they have that. A tension meter is is not the cheapest thing to buy for a shop. But again, if this is a hobby, well, you can use you know, some fishing weights or something and see how they deflect the screen when you pour them on the screen. But if this is a serious business, just like you invest in tools, you're going to invest in that tool to do it. So we try to go into as many shops as possible. It doesn't take very long to do it.
You know, Dave, I'm seeing a pattern here in this conversation. You did in fact, get a chance to eat that bacon, right? Because you've had the bacon
Oh, it's
analogy.
delicious.
Now we're talking about dryer donuts. So,
oh yeah, donuts. That's good.
for anybody who doesn't know, what Dave's referring to with a dryer donut, it's basically a device. It's like a ceramic circle and has a crosshatch wire on it. It's got a couple of wires attached to it, and you run that down your dryer belt, and in your hand you have a device that's telling you dryer temperature. So you'll see them in really big shops because somebody's got a 40-foot oven. They want to know at what point that garment is reaching curing temperature, because if it's at halfway point, that means I can double up my speed, and then of course you disconnect those cords and let it go off the other end, and you're all done. So Dave, you know, it's interesting when we're talking about newbies, and because a newbie's going to say, "Oh gosh, please come in, I need your help." But a lot of the bigger shops, I think, have a little bit of I already know all this syndrome, don't you think? Do you run into that?
Oh, sure. But you know, it's funny, Terry. When all my years, I was a graphic printer, a sign screen printer, UV ink, and so until I got with ICC, I wasn't even familiar with textiles, and I was horrified the first couple times I walked into a textile shop and there's ink everywhere, and I just didn't understand what they were doing. But I have to say, in the textile industry, the great majority of shops are willing to take advantage of anything you offer. What happens is, and if you're the owner of one of those shops, I would challenge you that the owner or the management will say, you know, that makes perfect sense, but my employees won't do it. They're used to using this kind of tape. They're used to doing this scenario, and then that becomes a challenge. So what we do on behalf of the owners and the management sometimes is I will say to them simply, just leave me alone with your staff, and let me kind of communicate back and forth with them, and try to get some of those old habits out. So long as you show somebody a legitimate reason to why that is going to work and that's better, they don't want to have to work any harder. The problem is that once upon a time they did it a different way, and the shirts were ruined or the shirts didn't work out, and from that day forward they're afraid to look at any other way. And so I think the difference that Atlas is offering in this program is we're doing it. I can't. So oftentimes we'll have they tease me at Atlas because I don't use the word sample. The only thing that is a sample is when you go to the wholesale club or Costco's or something on a Saturday and they're giving little weenies wrapped up in biscuits. That's a sample. What we're giving is a product to be tested in your shop. I think also a lot of times, even the big shops, the people are not comfortable that they know what they're supposed to know. So when you say, have you done an exposure test, do you have a calculator, and the high percentage of time they hand me an electronic calculator because they don't know what a calculator is. Nobody wants to be embarrassed. So by us just going in and doing it hands-on and assuming they don't have one and don't know what it is, and we just pull one out, then you know, we don't have to be embarrassed about who knows what. We just get it done.
You know, I have an example of a large shop situation where at some point in their process, and this happens in shops, you know, things change, employees change, and all of a sudden a process falls out or a process gets changed and nobody knows why. I did an intro to screen printing class at the ASI show in Chicago last year, and I'm going to do it again this year in July. And two people came into that class and said, listen, we've been printing for 20 years, and one of those two shops was a fairly large production operation, and they both said we only came to hear the tips and tricks, because, and I said, well, you must be here because you're having a problem. Both of them said, we have horrible pinhole problems on the press, and you well know, Dave, pinhole problems on the press can just destroy your productivity. I mean, you're just constantly taping and blocking out, and it turns out that neither of them were properly degreasing their screens. And you know, you think after 20 years you'd have all the processes down, but at some point, I don't know if they ever did it, but at some point they lost track of that step, and they suffered greatly for it, because the good thing about a big shop is you have a lot of production, you have a lot of revenue. The bad thing about a big shop is if you miss a step, then you have major issues out on a production floor.
Oh, without question. I oftentimes feel bad when I have to point something out to the owner or to the upper management of a shop, because I know they're going to have that sick to their stomach look on their face. But I was recently at a large shop, and I always hate that the entry-level position is the screen reclaiming position, because it doesn't matter how good of a printer you are. If the person preparing your screens doesn't know why they're preparing them a certain way, you're not going to get a good print. And so this was the case at this shop. They had hired somebody who had never been involved in screen printing. They gave them a modest, baptism by fire of here's how you do it. And the person really wanted to be conscientious, so he wore big, heavy rubber gloves throughout the cleaning process. And at the end of degreasing each screen, he did the entire process correctly. At the end of each screen, he would take that rubber glove and just wipe it one time across the screen to make sure there wasn't any fuzz or anything on the screen.
Oh, no.
And they watched. They said, "Are you doing the process?" They said, "I'm following every step there is." And so, but nobody took the time or had the time to just watch him work. And so I came in and watched what he was doing, and that was it. He was wiping the screen. But unless you're a little bit of a detective, or unless you kind of know, well, that looks like this kind of contamination, and like you say, well, obviously the guy's not degreasing the screen. Well, in this case, he was degreasing it, but he contaminated it after the fact. It's those kind of things that management will set up. And when we go in and beyond the calibration test, even for the larger customers, they really appreciate this. We'll go in and write their SOP, their standard operating procedure. And I don't mean just the big stuff. I'm writing one right now for a company that they go through 400 or 500 screens a day. This is an SOP of how to de-ink a screen after it's been printed. How do I people take the ink out of their screen? Because when we watched, out of their 15 automatic presses, there were 6 different methods by which the ink was taken out of the screen, which meant that 6 variances of ink were going back into reclaim and all of those things. And from a management standpoint, there's no way to control that process if everybody's doing it in a different way. So you're right. It's about getting them all on the same page so that it's easier to manage, easier to do.
Well, Dave, let's go step by step through this process. And first, let's talk a little bit about. You can tell our listeners about the curing step and what you guys do when you go in and work with a client and walk into the room and discuss curing.
Right. We first of all, most everybody will have the heat gun, a temperature gun. From various expenses, there you can get them at the Harbor Freight. You can get really expensive ones. What the first thing I find is I have to try to approach it in what I think they're going to do reasonably when we're not there. So there's ways to be very technical, and then there's ways to be very applicable. The first thing I notice is the difference in way people use their heat gun at the end of the dryer. We kind of joke and call this heat gun twister. People will contort their bodies in such a way that they're standing on one leg, they've got one arm out, they're trying to balance themselves as they get their heat gun in their arm halfway into the dryer because that's where it needs to be, while other ones are so distracted by the red infrared dot floating around the garment that they even forget what they're doing. So what we try to do is standardize the point that, for me personally, I'm going to put my heat gun at the edge of the gate, the opening of the press there. I'm not going to stick my hand in the dryer, and I'm going to get that red dot onto that ink, and I'm going to notice what it is and see what the temperature is. We try to then help them understand that the different inks and the different fabrics are going to have a curing temperature that is suited for that situation. One of the big problems we have is that if we're an international coatings dealer, but that's not important necessarily, but that international coatings will give out the spec sheet on their ink, and the ink needs to be cured at 330 degrees. It needs to get to that temperature, and you have good cure. Well, all of that is relative to how somebody is curing that ink. If I get it to 330 or 40 degrees in 2 seconds, I'm not going to get a good print. I have a lot of people that will try to cure shirts with a flash unit only. And they say, it doesn't always work out too well. Well, a flash is not really suited. It can be modified, but it's not suited to do that. So first and foremost, we will say to them, get a garment, a piece of fabric through your dryer at this temperature in this time span. Let's first understand that. And that sets our baseline. And from there, we know that if our dryer is set to 500 degrees and our belt is set to 19 on that dryer, that I'm going to get a garment that comes out, the ink has been at that temperature. And so we set the baseline, and then they're able to understand understanding how your dryer operates. Every dryer is different as far as, some have an adjustable heat element. The dryer that I work, it does not have a adjustable heat element. It has the gates on the end of the dryer that you raise and lower. Well, that's radically going to be different if I'm doing a calibration test to tell somebody, you need to set your dryer at this temperature and then adjust your belt speed to this speed, and you will get typically a properly cured plastisol print. And then you have them write that down. On the side of every dryer should be a spreadsheet, a note, something that says, when I'm running plastisol on a black garment, I do this. When I'm running discharge, I do this. And water base, I do that. Nylon, I do this. Every ink, just like your exposure test, every one of those should be on the side of the dryer so somebody knows what it is. And so that's really what we're doing there, is getting that baseline. And then the final thing about the dryer is to have them wash a garment. No matter how good we do on setting that dryer, wash the garment. I had a shop probably 6-7 months ago that I'm not an electrical guy necessarily, but had dropped part of the power in their shop, and they didn't realize it. They had their dryer set to what they thought the normal thing was. It was not putting out the normal heat, and they didn't know. And so they had it all set the way it normally would, and shirts are coming out, and they feel like they're cured, but they really weren't. So it's kind of setting those base marks for them to work with.
Absolutely. So Dave, let's talk a little bit about exposure time. That's something that you've already mentioned, and you talked about the exposure calculator. What do you guys do when you walk in the shop in that scenario?
The first thing I need to do is make sure that they're coating the screens properly, and that they are letting the screens dry properly. That's all over the board. When I was printing, I had very large screens, and I would coat my screens in the morning that I was going to expose the next day. And that way I knew that I wasn't trying to. I see so many people right now, and I don't understand why, other than they're just behind, is they will really force dry those screens after they've coated them. And what happens is they coat the outer layers of that emulsion, but the inner layer is still kind of gooey, and then when they expose the screen, it doesn't work out. So we make sure that they're coating and drying their screen properly. And then there's several different exposure tests, that you can use, exposure calculators, but I really do feel the Chromalon calculators, what we use, is superior because it has the light filter panel on it, to where you're actually doing 5 exposure tests at one time with that calculator. And so you just take a screen, and each mesh count, at least that first time, each mesh count should have a calculation done for it. So I'm going to take a one screen, and I'm going to ask them, what are you currently exposing this at? They'll say, well, I expose it for 60 seconds. Okay. Well, with that calculator, I'm going to double that. So we're going to expose that screen for 120 seconds. And when we wash it out, I'm going to, there's some graphics and whatnot on the calculator. It's not that important. But on the side, there is a section where each one of the little tests has had a percentage of that light. And so we're going to wash it out as we normally would. Well, if 60 seconds is right, then obviously we just grossly overexposed that screen. And we'll know that as we wash it out. But as we get down to the section that only got 25% of that light, it should fall off the screen. And so by looking at those sections, and I don't mean under a loop, I just mean looking at them initially, we will see which one is best. And if 60 seconds was really the accurate time, then we're going to see that 0.5 on the scale is perfect. But if not, we're going to take that time that we did, multiply it by the best image, and then that should be our time. And we're going to do one more exposure test at that time and make sure it's right. I typically see a 30% discrepancy on the right time versus what they're currently exposing at. And if you're working with a photopolymer, that goes up to about a 50 or 60% difference in what you really should be exposing. So if you're exposing a photopolymer and you're 5 seconds off, that's huge. If you're exposing your Lano 569 that I used 25 years ago, if you're a day off, it may not hurt you. But yeah, it's but that's what we do there, is we set that baseline, and then we will say, depending on their light unit, here's how often we want to do that calculation again, because they'll put new fluorescent tubes in and don't realize that those tubes are dying. Unless it's an LED light source, your lights are dying, and if you don't have an integrator, your exposure times are going to get longer and longer and longer unless you replace your bulb. So it's not a one-time done proposition. You have to do it on a regular basis.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that. Well, yeah, when we bought the exposure unit, we did that, that calculation, so why do we need to do it again? For anybody who hasn't used an exposure calculator, what Dave has mentioned here is looking at the best exposure. You've got a film positive that has all these different images on it, and what you do is you pick the one that looks the best. And when you find that one, it's going to have a decimal point number there. It might say 0.6, and we expose for 2 minutes. So we take 2 minutes times 0.6. That should be, at this point in time, our ideal exposure time. So it's a fairly simple thing to do. It's just not very many people do it.
Right, and you're going to do this with each emulsion. You know, when your local rep comes in and says, hey, I want you to try my emulsion, I pretty well have most of my customers trained anyway that when they say that, say, fantastic, when are you going to be back to do the calculations with me? And they'll say, oh, no, just do it how you're doing it now. No. Even within the same manufacturer, their exposure times are going to be different, and at times are going to be different on the screens. The mesh counts, if I'm exposing a 110 versus a 230, that exposure time is different. And this is an area that will get you all the way through the process, because most people, or many people that are way off on their exposure, they may say, hey, look, we're getting good prints, sharp images, it looks good, and they don't realize that when they go to reclaim that screen, that's why it's taking twice as long to reclaim it, because the screen was underexposed. So this is something that, or maybe they only do short runs, and so the screen doesn't break down. They don't realize that they are fingernails on a cliff of having a really catastrophic failure that then they're not going to be able to chase back. If I'm doing my exposure test, and I have my numbers, again, on the side of my exposure unit, should be all of my times, I have that variable orchestrated. I can go back and say, hey, are we following this? Yes. Have we done the calculation in the last month or two? Yes. Then I can pretty much eliminate that my exposure time is the culprit if I'm having a problem. And eliminating a source is probably more important than identifying, what the source is. I want to eliminate as many problems as I can.
Well, Dave, and along those lines too, sometimes people will think, okay, well, I'm telling you what all my equipment is. I'm telling you what screen mesh I'm using. I'm telling you what emulsion. Just give me the magic numbers. And what they have to realize, what we all have to realize, is that every single shop is different. Everybody has different environments. Everybody has different variables. And it's just like, Dave, in the class that we do there at Atlas Screen Supply. I always tell people, now, we're going to expose for this amount of time, but in reality, all of your screens are going to be different because what one person coats heavy, one person coats light. There's going to be variables that we have to deal with. So and so I tell them, when you get back to your shop, you'll be able to really nail down your perfect times and temperatures and all the things that you need to do. But in a situation where so many different people are doing the exact same process, well, everybody does it differently. So every shop, they need their own set of numbers depending on their environment and their own situation.
Well, and it's like we talk about the classes, and we talked when we were in Chicago, and in fact, I think actually Aaron was actually speaking at that time too, which is a novel thing, because we haven't heard from Aaron at all today. But
I see a little picture down in the corner.
Talking about yeah, it's kind of weird. I think he's playing like World of Doom or something. I don't know. When we talked at the show about how you have to do some kind of continuing education, in this business. And what I'll tell people, we have some companies right now that are wanting to get into screen printing. They have been using contractors. They don't like the quality or the speed or the margins or whatever, and so they say, hey, I'm going to tell me everything I need to set up a shop, and then show me how to use it. And it's the most horrifying question we get asked, because how do you encapsulate that all into knowing that they're expecting a good shirt to come off that dryer with little to no understanding of how it happened? And as you learn how to do these things, I will tell them, listen, find out who it is that you trust to be your expert and stick with them. So if they think that Terry Combs is the guy they want to follow, then follow him, because I can't tell you how often I'll get the phone call, or I said they'll get text messages now with a weird-looking image picture on it, and somebody saying, is it supposed to look like this? And they'll say, I saw on the internet, I watched a YouTube video where a guy was doing this. If I had $1 for every time I wanted to punch a kitten when I heard that phrase, it is tragic, because they said, I saw where I could use a spatula to coat emulsion on my screen. And, well, you could, I guess. I don't know why you would want to do that, but somebody made a video doing it. I've seen some really bizarre videos on YouTube that didn't inspire me to go out and do something dumb. But when you're that lost, or when you're so frustrated that you're trying to find an answer, you'll cling to whatever. The problem is, like you just said, all of your parameters are different than the parameters of the shop or the guy doing the video. So by us going in and doing these tests and these calibrations and these reviews on site, we're working exactly in their shop, exactly with what they're working with, and that's the best way to know exactly what you're supposed to do.
Exactly. The last subject that we're going to talk about here is mesh tension, and I've got to throw out my story about mesh tension, because it's very similar to the kind of things that happened to you. I went into a shop one time, and the owner was just frantic. He said, our screens on our floor have just horribly low tension. and we can't figure out. We bought the most expensive pneumatic stretching device. It will stretch 6 screens at once. It was a stretch and glue situation, So we put the glue on and cut them apart. And as soon as they get on the production floor, they've got a tension of like 8 newtons. We don't know if it's the mesh. We don't know what's happening to these screens. We just can't figure it out. And I said, well, I'm sure we can figure it out. Let me spend some time with the gentleman who's stretching the screens, and he's going through all the steps. He had 6 screens out there, and he's got it stretched. He's got his tension meter, and he puts it all around, making sure that he's got proper tension. And I said, okay, well, now what's your next step? He goes, well, it's time to glue. So then he picks up a gallon of ink and puts it in the middle of the first screen, picks up a gallon of ink, puts it in the middle of the second screen, and so forth, till he has 6 gallons of ink sitting in the middles of these screens. And why is it you're doing that? Well, see, if I hold the mesh down real tight against the screens, it's easier to glue it. Well, okay. Well, therein lies the problem, First of all, it was somebody who was stretching the screens who didn't know the impact of what he was doing out on the production floor. So that was one of my favorite stories, though, that I've witnessed personally.
Yeah, the things that I've seen in screen stretching, I went into a similar shop where the guy was just super frustrated, and I said, so, on average, what's your tension? And I swear this is true. He said, well, my doctor just changed my medication, so it has gotten better. And I said, well, I meant for the screens, but I understand the problem you're having. I was at another shop who had invested in all retensionable screens, a stretching table, the whole deal. So they had really put some money into this, but nobody had ever shown them the importance of having a loose corner on the retrenchable frame. And so they would stretch the frame, it would rip, and the guy finally just got frustrated, so he built his own stretching table where he would take the roller frame and he would stretch the mesh across a surface and staple it down or glue it down somehow, and then he would put a retentionable frame under it, and then he would use a hydraulic jack to push the roller frame up into the mesh until it was tight, and then he would glue the mesh to the roller frame. And I said, wow, that's a lot. And he said, well, you know what? He said, I've been doing it that way for about 10 years, and I'm getting good screens. And he said, but the problem is that, ungluing them afterwards is kind of a pain. And I wish there was some way that I could get some better tension on them before they fell apart. And I said, well, since you've glued it, and that is a roller frame, how about if we just get another crank on that roller frame? And it's much like what I think a caveman probably looked like the first time they saw fire. That this guy thought, wow, I can get another couple newtons out of this thing. But when we go in, right now, Terry, I don't know, this is one of those things that probably will get me kicked out of the Screen Printers Hall of Fame, but most shops I deal with, unless you have somebody that is on your payroll to do nothing but make screens, stretch screens, in my opinion, you're probably not suited to make your own screens. And I know, we want good tension, we want high tension, we want every screen to be like a sheet of glass. But the problem with that is that if you don't do it on a regular basis, you don't know how to do it very well, and you get frustrated, and it's poorly done. And right now, like for us, at Atlas, we can provide you with a great pre-stretched screen, aluminum frame with new mesh on it, ready to print. It's going to hold a great tension. It's been stretched and relaxed, and the memory's been taken out of it, and it's going to be a great usable screen for a long time. And then when that screen rips or it's no good anymore, you trade that into us, and we give you a trade-in price for it and send you a brand new one. The reason I think that's important is you can only stretch and unstretch and glue and unglue aluminum so many times before it can't hold that same tension anymore. And that wasn't true maybe 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, but the aluminum was much thicker in the frames. If you remember an aluminum frame long ago, it was still a pretty heavy frame. Like everything, things get cheaper. Some of the newer aluminum frames are not going to hold, stretch and unstretch very many times. But when we go into a shop, I will most shops are going to use the tap-tap method of screen tension. They're going to take the screen, tap-tap with their finger, and go, yeah, that's pretty good. And it's relative to, yeah, it's pretty good against everything else you have in your shop. So it may only be 7 newtons, but if the rest of your screens are 5 newtons, 7 newtons feels pretty tight. So what I'll try to do in those cases, I'll bring in I don't know that I expect, actually Atlas is going to have a sale here in the next week or so on tension meters, and it'll be interesting to see how many people take advantage of it. But I get it. Most people don't want to drop a few $100 from this tension meter. So I do try to come up with some relative way. And so the one trick that I've come up with is I will convince them to buy one screen at tension that they never use and keep that one screen so they remember what 25 newtons feels like. And in that way, it's a cheap, goof-proof way of having something relative, because otherwise you're never going to know what tension is. So if they'll take that one screen, I usually have like a 230 mesh or something, and say, look, this screen is perfectly stretched to the perfect tension. If you're not going to invest, a couple $100 in a meter, at least invest $20 in a frame, and set this over to the side. And when you're going to try to see if your screens are out of tension, tap on that screen and then tap your other screens, and you'll start to realize how saggy some of these screens are. I'll also bring in a screen sometimes and have them print with a screen with higher mesh tension, and there's nothing like the difference between printing on 7 newtons versus printing on 25 newtons. The only way you understand that is to do it, is to literally print something. And so what they'll do is they keep thinking they need to get a smaller mesh count. They need to go, man, I need to be in 110s. I love it during the class when you'll talk to people about 305 or whatever, and they look at you and go, man, we're not printing circuit boards. What are you talking about? Well, no. If you have good tension, you can get ink through that little hole. It's not a problem. But what they're used to is a poorly tensioned screen, and so they go, I just need a bigger hole. Well, eventually, just don't even use the mesh. Just kind of smear it on with a putty knife and try to get it in the spot that you want it in. So, but that's what we do. We go through and we kind of just check their inventory and see how many of their screens really do have good tension, and if not, try to help them figure out the best way to make that happen.
And Dave, I could not agree with you more. It's all in the name. It's screen printing. It's all about the screen. If you get the screens right, you're 90% there. As we all know, I mean, pulling the squeegee or pushing the squeegee is the easy part. It's the screen that makes all the difference. And I want to agree with something else you said, especially in small shops, when people are struggling trying to stretch their own screens. We all have a finite amount of time in our businesses, and we're already printing at 3 a.m. Taking a half day to stretch screens is, when you can buy that screen for a little bit more than what you paid for all the materials, and that's not counting the spoilage, and your time's pretty valuable. Today, especially in a small shop, if you are taking the time to stretch screens, you're probably, that time could be much better spent making money for your business.
Well, the stretching the screens and the sharpening the squeegees, the number of people that are convinced that they can sharpen their squeegee, with not even a notion of really what that even means. When I printed full time, I had, and I still use this now. I would have the not plumber's crack, but the plumber's sandpaper, and I would have the plumber's sandpaper mounted to a flat table. And if I had a nick in a squeegee, I would take that squeegee and I would run it left to right across that plumber's sandpaper strip, and because it was a long, get a long piece of it, and that would take that nick out, at least if I didn't have the nick. But I have yet to see a squeegee sharpener device, tool, whatever you want to call it, that if somebody is not doing it on a regular basis, they'll say, well, all you do is you lock it in this thing, and it goes back and forth, and it sharpens that squeegee. And you say, yeah, well, how do you clean that squeegee? Well, I use mineral spirits. Okay, well, that squeegee is swelled up, about 30% bigger than it is, and it's warped. So the squeegee sharpener is doing exactly what you told it to do. Run back and forth along this thing and keep grinding off squeegee rubber until it gets to an even place. But that doesn't mean it's even relative to the holder. So now you've got, one leg is shorter than the other as you're trying to pull the squeegee across it, and it just doesn't work. Whereas squeegee rubber now is so affordable, the amount of time to fool with it, just throw it away. It's just not worth the time to hope that you get it right. If you're in a pinch and you don't have more squeegee rubber, well, call us and we can give you some tips on from using block out on a squeegee to fix a nick to something else. But sharpening squeegee falls into the same place as making your own frames.
It's funny, and nothing against the folks who sell squeegee sharpeners. I'm sure you guys do sell them as well. But I will always say to people, they'll say, "Do you see a lot of these out there?" Oh yeah, absolutely. I see a lot of squeegee sharpeners in shops, but they usually are in the corner with a tarp over them. People are not necessarily using them.
Yeah, they're great. Like I said, just like all of the tensioning tools that are out there. If your shop is dedicated to doing that and has somebody on the payroll doing that, fantastic. That person, a squeegee, can certainly be sharpened by somebody that knows how to sharpen a squeegee. It's like sharpening a knife. When I was younger, I thought all you did was just I saw somebody use a stone and like a wheel, and I thought, well, shoot, my dad's got a grinder, and so I took one of my knives out there to the grinder, and I just kept grinding on it till it looked sharp. That knife would never hold an edge again because that wasn't how you did it. So there is a skill to it, and if you don't have that skill or time, don't do it.
Well, Dave, we're getting a little short on time, so I only have one last thing to say to you, and here's your opportunity, buddy. Dip tanks.
I feel like I'm being made fun of at this point, but I just restate that all the time that I finally, I think, have found an analogy. I was at a shop where there was some young ladies working there, part of the crew, and the analogy came to me of running a bath. And I said, okay, ladies, look, you're going to run a bath tonight when you go home, and you're going to take a bath in that bathtub and that bath water for a whole week. Now, you're girls, so you're not very gross, and that won't be very bad. But every time you step out of the bathtub, you're obviously going to be wet, and you're going to carry out some water. So you can add some water to it to keep it full, but you're going to take a bath in there. And they go, that's probably not so bad. And I said, now, so are these other 10 guys. Now, not all together because that would be creepy, but over the course of this whole week, all 11 of you are going to use that same bath water to take a bath in. And they don't immediately go drain the dip tank, but it's within the day or two that they drain the dip tank because they get it, that there's no possible way to clean something in something that's dirty. It doesn't happen. And some great screen printing minds I know have put a lot of thought into this, and they swear by the dip tank. But if you're trying to orchestrate your variables and get them consistent, by its nature, that chemical is dying every screen you put in there. And so your process gets weaker by one screen every time you add another screen to it. So, hey, we sell them at Atlas. It breaks my heart when somebody buys them, but hopefully they use them for water only. But yeah, if you want to debate me on the dip tank, bring it on. I'll talk to you about it.
Well, we're not making fun. We appreciate your passion.
Right. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, so I am going to finally come in. I'm here. No, I've actually been paying attention. I didn't fall asleep or anything.
I thought maybe you were mowing your grass.
Nope. I've enjoyed the conversation here, and as most people know, I don't have a ton to add on the screen printing side. I know just enough to be dangerous, so I leave it to experts like you guys, and appreciate all the info there. Now, the one thing I did take away from this, though, is if this is correct, Dave, you were saying that not everything on the internet is true. Is that correct?
You're exactly right. Unless it has Terry Combs' name after it, I would find it skeptical.
All right, all right. Well, I have to send some products back here as soon as we're done then.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Starting with my pocket fisherman. Remember those?
Right.
Awesome. So, Dave, the question I do have for you is, where can people find out more information about you guys at Atlas there, and maybe get in contact with you guys to see about setting up a shop calibration?
Sure. If you go to the website, of course, everybody has a website. So atlasscreensupply.com. We recently updated our website. So in the past, it was also .net, but either of them will get you there. And that will give you the contact information to get with me. And I think that the Two Regular Guys website, I think you have my contact information on there probably.
Yep.
People, and I always tell people, whether you're buying products from us or not, that's not a ticket to ride. You're welcome to call me regardless of what you're buying or who you're buying from. So the website is probably the best, and then I still haven't memorized our number, but 800-621-4173. That's the Atlas Screen Supply number, and you can ask for me. Chris Thomas is there. Jason, Tina, everybody there can walk you through several things, but they can get you to me if it's more technical than that.
Great. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks for spending some of your Sunday afternoon with us, Dave, and appreciate you coming to give us some more info. And like I said, this will be broadcast as a podcast later on in the week as well, so we'll get that information out there. And I think we'll go ahead and take a quick break here and then wrap it up, Terry.
Very good. Thanks, Dave.
Hey, thanks, guys. See ya.
Aaron, I couldn't help but notice that Dave has a much better chair than we do. I mean, you see how the big comfy leather chair he was sitting in?
Yeah, looks very, very comfy now. Yes. All right. Well, again,
Dave's a fountain of knowledge, man. I love chatting with him, and he is so passionate about what he does. You know, you love talking to somebody that loves their work.
Yeah, it is, and he's just got such a good sense of. He obviously has some convictions and things that he's passionate about, but he'll certainly talk to you and doesn't take himself too seriously or anything like that. Type of guy that you want to have around if you want to learn something. So
Exactly right. I agree 100%.
Yeah, good. Well, what else is going on, Terry? We'll go ahead and wrap up the show here. I guess actually I'm going to. Since I didn't participate very much, I am going to talk for a second. I just wanted to say thanks to everybody who sent warm wishes and whatnot for our 25th anniversary party on Friday. It was a blast. We had a great time. Had our customers out there, and barbecue was awesome, and the day was beautiful, and just was a really nice time to kind of take a breather and recognize the owner of our company, Andy Pickering, for what he's been able to do over these 25 years, and thank all of our customers and all the employees. We have a fantastic group of folks that we work with there at Coastal, and so and we appreciate everybody cutting us some slack on shutting down for a half day. We don't do that very often. Being available 8 to 8, I think people get used to that, and all of a sudden when they can't get a hold of us one Friday afternoon, it can cause a little panic. So,
well, hopefully everybody understood, and that's tremendous achievement. Being in business for 25 years and being as successful as Coastal has been. So congratulations to all you guys.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Cool. So speaking of Atlas, you've got a class coming up there pretty soon, correct?
I do. I'm going to be joining Dave and the crew at Atlas on May 16th and 17th. So that's 2 weeks from now. Today will be the second day of class 2 weeks from now. And it's a great hands-on intro, and it covers everything from how to code a screen to how to set up a 5-color, 6-color job on black shirts to how to run a business. So I think they still have some seats available. All my events, by the way, you can find at terrycombs.com. Just click on the tab that says tour dates, and everything's there. And love to see some of our listeners at the class.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's before we get into kind of a couple other upcoming dates, do want to keep on with our regular section that we've added to our show. I think I can't remember the exact date, but we've probably been doing it for a good 6 months or so now. And I know we've got 6 pages of these tips up on our website at tworegularguys.com. If you just go over to the industry info tab and pull down, there's a quick tips, and you can search through anything there. We've got everything from screen printing to DTG to sublimation to transfers and all things in between. We're gonna have to get Andrea to give us some tips on embroidery and any other stuff out there. So, but it is your week here, Terry. So why don't you share with us your tip today?
We've gotten ourselves out of sync. When you talk most of the show, you also have the tip, and when I talk most of the show, I have the tip. We need to get Andrea, throw one of hers in there to get us back into stagger it a little bit. But this tip actually is a proper shirts for direct-to-garment printing. And Aaron, you several months ago, you actually talked about using the proper shirts for different methods. But I want to bring it up again because so many people who buy direct-to-garment printers make the assumption I can use the same shirts I'm using, and there are 2 variables that impact the quality of the image that we print. The first is proper pre-treating, and the second is the proper garment. And I was talking to a gentleman this past week, and he was talking about the issues that he has with just can't get a nice bright image. And of course, we talked a little pre-treating, and I said, well, how about the garments? And he named a brand that he was using and said, I've been using this shirt for the last 20 years, screen printing. And I said, well, that's the rub. You can get away with just about any garment with a lot of the decoration methods, but there are specific garments that you want to use with direct-to-garment printing. And first of all, it needs to be 100% cotton. Second of all, it needs to be ring spun, combed cotton, and it needs to have a very nice tight weave and a nice flat surface. No amount of laying down more ink or more pre-treat or less pre-treat or 1,000 of a variables will make a shirt that is not properly made for direct-to-garment printing will give you a good print. So everybody, the beauty is everybody is coming out with shirts specifically made for direct-to-garment printing because it's become such a force in the industry. So the Hanes Nano, the Fruit of the Loom, HD. I only going to name a couple, but there are a lot of Cotton Heritage. There are lots of them out there that are specifically made for the process. So also, sometimes we have to print a blend. Like sweatshirts, it's really hard to find 100% cotton sweatshirt in any variety of colors. So a 90-10 blend, 90% cotton, 10% poly, or even an 80-20 will print perfectly fine. Once you get down to 50-50s, and I've had people call me up and say this, why can't I get a good print on this 50-50 sweatshirt? What you're getting is as good as it's going to get. It's never going to be better. But they were only $7. Well, I get that. But you're using... for this particular decoration method, you have to use the proper tools. So that's my kind of lecture on using the proper shirt for the proper process.
Awesome. All right, good deal. Perfect. Well, sounds great. I think that will probably get us close to wrapped up here today. And you're heading off to ISS Nashville next week, correct?
I am. I'm leaving on Tuesday afternoon, and setup's on Wednesday, and I'll be winging my way back to Phoenix late on Saturday night. And while I'm there, I'm going to meet up with Andrea and our friend Megan, and go out doing a little honky tonkin', and Hawkeye and Alex and Mrs. Hawkeye will be there as well. So going to have a good time outside of the show, and hopefully have a great show during the day. And I'm doing a direct-to-garment seminar as well. And so looking forward to another trip to Nashville.
Awesome. Well, if you want more information about that, head on over to issshows.com. And again, that's a lot of S's in there, so just keep it going. It is exactly how it's so ISSSHOWS. Great website over there. Get all the information, get registered. I think you can still register for the show floor for free, if I remember right. It should be close at least to that time. If not, I'm sure somebody out there has got a code that you can use to get onto the show floor for free. But take advantage of Terry's class and the several other fantastic classes that all of their classes are great. Everybody that puts them on, are industry veterans like yourself, Terry.
Industry veteran. I mean, guys that have been in the business since 1979 or before. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's wrap it up, and I'm going to get back out to building up the swing set so my kid can go play on it and enjoy the nice weather outside while you've got your toes in the pool. And I was able to grab a cool screen capture of you here, Terry. That was pretty funny. So I'm going to throw that up here to close us out.
Oh, great.
There, does that show up there?
I'm not. Nice.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks again to Dave from Atlas Screen Supply, and we will talk to you guys in a couple of weeks here.
Very good. Talk to you soon.